and I made what I now deem like a solid rookie mistake. I started dating someone who also said they were non-monogamous, but we didn't talk about what that really meant to either of us.
Welcome to Normalizing Non-Monogamy, the podcast where we interview incredible people from all over the world to hear their personal journeys of self-discovery through the lenses of love, sex, and relationships.
Our mission is to show people that they're not alone and to inspire them to embrace their true selves so that together we can open minds and live authentically without shame.
We believe everyone's story is powerful and beautiful, yet it's important to remember that everyone does life a little bit differently and that the views and opinions expressed by our guests do not necessarily reflect our own.
Additionally, we aren't doctors. Please consult a medical professional for anything regarding your health that you might learn about on the show. Enjoy!
Well, welcome to episode 381. We're Finn and Emma, and today we have a beautiful conversation with JoEllen. We cover a lot of ground in this interview, and it's a beautiful story. JoEllen sort of woke up one day back in 2011 and knew that life had to change. She didn't know what she wanted, but she knew what she didn't want, and she set out to figure that out, and she shares that journey with us today.
Yeah, as you said, Emma, this is a wonderful conversation, and one of the things you'll hear JoEllen talk about is how she is somebody who wants to talk about all the things that most people don't want to talk about and all the things that we're not talking about.
Yeah, they might be a little uncomfortable, but we really should be talking about them.
Totally. And so her story today is a lot about how depression has played a huge role in her life and sort of how, like you said, she kind of woke up in 2011 and was like, no, not doing this anymore. I don't know exactly what I want, but we're going to go figure it out. And not only did she figure it out for herself, but she also documented her journey on a blog that has grown into so much more than just a blog. Yes. You can find her work over at The Redhead Bedhead. Subtitle of that is Sex, Mental Health, and How None of Us Are Broken. And then that kind of led into a few different books. The first book she wrote is called The Monster Under the Bed, Sex, Depression, and the Conversations We Aren't Having. And her second book, In It Together, Navigating Depression with Partners, Friends, and Family. So please check out JoEllen's incredible work. Check out her website. Go grab a copy of her books. And please subscribe to her on Patreon, where you can find her latest work, her new work, and to help support the incredible work that she does. So one more time, please go check it out.
A quick reminder, you can find links to all of JoEllen's work over on our website, normalizingnonmonogamy.com. Click on the podcast tab or in your podcast player. And with that, for anyone who's a premium subscriber, we're going to jump right into the interview with JoEllen now. And for anyone else, we're going to go through a few announcements. First up, if you're not familiar with the premium subscription, it's a way to skip these announcements up front, but don't worry, we remind you of important dates in the outro of upcoming events. To sign up for the premium subscription, go over to our website, normalizingnonmonogamy.com, scroll down on the homepage, and you can sign up right there for only $4 a month.
And one of those really exciting dates, actually a whole weekend full of dates.
Yes.
We have an in-person gathering, a retreat, April 25th to the 27th down in Atlanta, Georgia. This is for members of our community, so we're telling you here, because perhaps you're a member of our community and you didn't know this was happening, which I don't know how that's possible. But you also may not be a member of our community and you're thinking, well, hey, what better time to join the community than when I can go and hang out with 30 to 50 amazing people in Atlanta. There's workshops, there's all sorts of activities, there's going to be delicious food, and it's going to be a wonderful party. So please, if you're interested in the community, you've been kind of dragging your feet on joining, now is the time to do it. You also get virtual stuff that we have all day, every day. We've got people hanging out in an app called Mighty Networks, and we do monthly virtual calls, different support calls. So you get it all. You get in person, you get virtual, and there's no better time to join than today.
To sign up or find out more information, go over again to our website, normalizingnonmonogamy.com, and click on the community tab. All of the information's right there.
Yeah, the information to join the community is there, but there's also a link to check out a 13-page PDF that we made.
About the Atlanta retreat.
About the whole retreat, everything you would get, what it looks like, and how to join us. So please, check it out. We'd love it if you'd check it out. Go do it.
Next up, we wanted to remind you all that the next date for our virtual speed friending is going to be March 20th. That is on our website under the events tab as well. But we just did one of these virtual speed friending events last week. It was fantastic, and we can't wait for this next one. Mark your calendars and join us on March 20th.
Yeah, if you're not familiar with these events, they're open to anybody. And the way they work is we bring everybody together in Zoom, and then we ask a question like, what's something you've always wanted to do, but you've never done it, and what's holding you back. And then we put you in a breakout room with a few people. You talk about a question for a few minutes. Then we scramble the rooms, ask a new question. We do this over and over for 2 hours. Again, these are open to anybody and everybody, and it's a wonderful way to meet people from all over the world who are open-minded like you.
So come join us.
Come join us.
March 20th.
March 20th. There's a banner at the top of our website. You can't miss it.
And if you happen to be listening to this, you're like, oh, darn, I missed the March 20th one. Don't worry. There'll be more. Just go look at the most recent date on our website. And finally, last but not least, we wanted to remind you all about our favorite way to get tested for STIs. It is stdcheck.com. You also hear us talking about this every single week, but it is the service that Finn and I use to get tested. And it is great. It's so efficient and
that's why we use it.
Right.
We wouldn't use it if it wasn't great.
And discreet. It's really nice that we can have a discreet way to get tested for STIs. You can also save $10 when you use the links on our website under the resources tab, making a 10-panel test only $129. You get to know your sexual health status, and you get to support the podcast and the show. Thank you in advance for doing so.
Thank you.
Yes.
That's a thank you from me too.
And a final reminder, we would love to hear from you. Reach out to us over on the contact page of our website. Send us an email, send us a voicemail. If you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, we'd love to have you. Or if you have any feedback for us, questions, comments, please reach out to us.
And one more little oomph around, we'd love to have you on the podcast. We love having everybody on the podcast. Anybody who wants to share their story, you are welcome. You don't have to be a podcaster, a blogger, an author. You just have to be you. So please reach out to us. Come on the show. We'd love to tell your story.
And with that, let's go and talk with JoEllen. Welcome to the podcast, JoEllen. We're really excited to talk with you today and to learn more about you. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, we're excited about your story, but also your incredible work. And
yes.
So we are just feel super fortunate to be able to do this today. So without much further ado, would you mind introducing yourself for us and for the listeners?
So my name is JoEllen Noddy, and I'm going to be really honest. Right now, in terms of my career and my non-monogamous life and all of it, it's all up in the air. I'm like a lapsed sex writer, and I've written a couple of books on sex and depression, and then on navigating all sorts of relationships and depression. And I've been living non-monogamously for years and years, but also right now I'm kind of like, what am I doing with any of it? So it's a very exciting and very weird time to be talking to me. And I'm really excited to talk to literally anyone about it because it's great.
I love that too, because then it also demonstrates that how malleable and like we are, and how life changes, like we change, life changes, things go.
Some things change without our consent.
Exactly. Oh, yeah, that happens too. So thank you for being honest right up front and being like, this is where I'm at. I love it.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's a good place to start. Like, where are you? Where are you at the moment? And we'll go back and figure out what the hell happened to get us here.
Cool. So physically, I'm in New Jersey in my childhood home right now. Let's go. I'm going to take us all the way back. In 2011, I woke up in a marriage in Massachusetts and looked around my life and went, I'm not supposed to be here at all. And kind of blew up the whole thing. And a year later, I said, you know what? I don't know stuff about sex, and I've never known stuff about sex, and I've always felt uncomfortable about it. And I've been like, not admitting that. And I felt like everybody else got like a handbook that I never got. And I decided what I was going to do was start a website, and I was going to learn stuff about sex and write about it as I learned about it. And as I started learning, I found out about non-monogamy, and I was like, hold up. And I said, you know what? I never want to just like commit everything to one person ever again, because that seems scary. And like, I felt trapped, and I felt like, I just didn't want to ever do that again. And so off we went. I started my site, The Redhead Bedhead, and that was where I blogged for years and years. And I also came into all of that with a history of depression, which kicked up about a year into having my site. And I wrote a blog post about it, because when you're a year into being a sex blogger, you tell everybody everything all the time.
Yep. The filters are off.
Yep. And I took a medication, and it made me not able to orgasm, so I wrote about it. And that was when I found out it wasn't just my mom reading my site. I got all of these messages from people who said, I thought it was just me. I didn't know other people were having this. And so from there, I decided to do a survey and find out how many other people were having these side effects. And I was going to write a book that just was like sexual side effects. They happen to other people too.
Mm-hmm.
But along with the survey, which I thought would be like 200 people and ended up being 1,100.
Wow.
I got volunteers to do interviews. So 500 people volunteered. I opened up 100 slots because I am but one person. But depressed people, my people, we're not terrific at showing up for scheduled things. So 20 people showed up.
Wow. Okay.
So I said, okay, we got to do something different. I put out an essay question survey, right? An interview depressed people do on their own time. And that is when 175 people wrote in. And they all wrote about how their relationships functioned. And that changed the whole thing. And I ended up writing my book, The Monster Under the Bed, which is half sex and depression and half navigating your relationship and depression. And that's kind of like how my career happened. I accidentally took sex writing and made it depressing, but also hopefully helped people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Help people not feel alone in it.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. That's kind of what I felt like when I showed up to sex writing. I never felt sexy or cool. And at first I was like, I'm going to become sexy and cool. And then I was like, well, but what about other people who aren't sexy and cool? What if I told them it's okay to not be sexy or cool? So I think that kind of became my gig, not being sexy or cool.
Or redefining what sexy and cool are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's amazing because there's so much, right? There's so much in the world out there that says this is what you should look like, this is how you should be, and if you're not looking that way or being that way, then you're not sexy or cool. And I think what we're starting to see now, hopefully, and I hope through your work too, is that you're talking about this stuff is sexy. It is awesome because then you're like, wow, I know you as a person, and it's not. Sometimes it's not me. You're going through your own stuff, and it's like everybody just. It's like you turn the light on and all the scary shadows sort of become a little less scary.
Yeah. And, one of the things that inspired me to write about my own side effects was this guy who I went on a date with in 2012. And he was super cute. I was so into this guy. And he told me very early on, I'm taking this medication and it makes it really hard for me to orgasm. And I thought, oh my God, that's so cool that he said that to me.
Yeah.
And it just made him even cuter to me. And I thought the world needs to know that we can just talk about this.
Yep.
And I wrote to him. I hadn't seen him in years and years. When my book came out, I wrote to him and I was like, just so you know, you inspired me to do this. So I hope your life is cool. And so that was pretty neat.
That's amazing.
Did you hear back?
I did. He sent me a really sweet message. Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
I'm curious, JoEllen, what if you're okay talking a little bit about what happened in 2011, it sounds like you woke up metaphorically in the dark and were like, I don't want to be in the dark anymore. I'm going to figure this out. And I also think it's just amazing that you were like, I'm not going to just figure it out for me. I can't be the only one. I'm going to put it out there. That's a big undertaking to step into as you're trying to wake up yourself.
Yeah. And I'm just expanding on that a little bit, curious before that, if you had any, I don't know, it sounds like you didn't have any examples or anything else in your life. You were kind of just going through what the status quo of what you thought you were supposed to be doing.
Yeah. Yeah. I always say that I got married and stuff. I'd gone through a horrible depressive episode in my 20s and a really bad debilitating injury. And I think, I had this boyfriend who was a great guy and on paper, everything really fit. And we moved up to Boston, a city that I loved, and everything sounded like the right life for me. And I just kept telling myself, this works, this fits, this should make me happy.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a terrible habit of not listening to that voice in my head that points out the things that aren't working. And it was there. And I was just like, no, see, these are all the ways this does work. And I was I was wrong. It totally didn't. And I remember calling my dad when I was like piecing it together and saying to him, Dad, something's not right. And my dad loved to offer his hotel points to people to like go on vacation. And he was like, do you need Marriott points? And I said, Dad, that's not going to cut it. And he jumped on a train from New Jersey and met me at like 8 a.m. the next day in Boston. And we had brunch. And I said to him, this is what's going on in my marriage. And my parents divorced when I was very little. And my dad got remarried when I was like 9. And he said, I know exactly what you mean. That went on in my second marriage for 25 years. And that like woke me up because I was like, oh, this could go on forever.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad was getting divorced as that was happening. And I realized that I could stick around and have 25 years of an unsatisfying marriage, or I could let us both go then.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's a big revelation to have. And then, like I said, I mean, it's amazing that you step into it in a way that, I mean, was it empowering then to say, like, I'm going to do this almost publicly?
Well, okay. So full disclosure, my dad also died 2 months later.
Oh, wow. Okay. I'm so
And
sorry.
so, yeah, it was a year that year. And I think that really kind of shot me like out of a rocket. Like,
Yeah.
Fuck this. I'm not going to waste any more time.
Yep.
And yeah. And so I think in a way that it wouldn't have otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
But it took a year before I went like public with any of that stuff.
Sure.
I spent a year kind of cocooned.
Which makes sense.
Yeah,
by the way.
I'm not.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. But when I started my website, I didn't know that was a thing. I didn't it wasn't like I've seen a lot of sex writers come up later, and there's a lot of I hung out on the outskirts. I watched everybody on social media, and then I decided to start my site. I didn't do any of that. All of my social media and my website and all of it was born the same day, July 3rd, 2012. July 4th weekend I did it. I don't know why. I thought it was this novel idea that I was writing about sex on the internet. I was so naive. I had no idea. But it's looking back really weird that it came completely out of the blue and out of nowhere. And yeah.
And it sounds like part of that discovery was the non-monogamous piece, and that was a bit of a light bulb moment. What did you find in that, and what hit you that was like, oh, this?
I think it's a part of kind of what I'm dealing with again now was that not knowing what I wanted the future to look like, but just knowing what I didn't want the future to look like, and knowing that it wasn't going back and getting married again. I was thinking as I was getting divorced about my parents' divorce and how my mother was remarried a year and a half later. And I was like, oh my God, that's no time. How you didn't take any time to go be single and go do things. And I couldn't imagine that. And I just knew that whatever was coming next, I didn't want it to look like that locked down. I feel like the language I use around relationships sounds like prison, and it really shouldn't, but I just very much had that fear of feeling trapped.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that propelled me a bit.
I mean, I also think too, right, that some of us have experienced marriages that feel like prison. And I think if that is part of your experience, of course, that's your mindset coming out of it is why would I jump right back into something that I just worked so hard to get out of and I want to find myself, right?
Or also you recognize that you were convincing yourself that this was the way to do things. This is what was good. And then it's why there's natural fear. Why would I go back into that when I just am realizing that I made those decisions that weren't actually aligned with what I wanted or truly deeply what you needed and wanted and had to get out of that, had to change that.
Yeah. And I think it's the scariest part is that it's not because I talk a lot about my fear of I feel like I deal a lot with dudes who decide I'm going to change your mind about this non-monogamy thing and we're going to be but I also know I am my own risk for gaslighting myself into like, that's not what's happening. You're happy in this situation. You like this situation. This is the smart. And so I have to watch myself because it's not always good.
No, totally. Well, and I'm curious, what did the beginning stages of, you learn about non-monogamy, you're single again, you're dating, you got a website kind of up and coming. What did it look like when you started digging in and actually, quote unquote, doing the non-monogamy for yourself?
So I didn't actually. So first, when I was still living in Boston, I was just dating. I just went on what I call my dating rampage. One of my friends called it my trampage, and I liked that.
I like that.
But then I moved to Portland, Oregon, which if you're going to be non-monogamous somewhere, Portland, Oregon's a pretty easy place to do it. And I made what I now deem like a solid rookie mistake. I started dating someone who also said they were non-monogamous, but we didn't talk about what that really meant to either of us. And to me, I like to conduct separate relationships. And he liked the idea that we were the central relationship and we could go other places and hook up with other people, but he would be like in control of that situation and I would never be hooking up with anybody without him there. It was very like kind of swingery, but like it was, it was not
what you
my
were
bag.
envisioning.
Not even a little. Yeah.
Very different pages.
And there was lots of control issues and it got very ugly very quick and clearly did not last very long. And that was when I learned you need to talk very, very explicitly about what you mean when you say you're non-monogamous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it sounds like this was even for you right at the beginning was not even like I've got a ton of experience. It was just sort of, this is what makes natural sense and feels right for me.
Yeah. Rookie mistake in some ways.
Yeah.
Like you said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's a mistake. I will be honest. We've talked to so many people too that I think that's a mistake people make years or decades into.
Exactly. It's not necessarily a rookie mistake. I mean, it is and it isn't. Like it can happen at any point.
Two people show up and say, "I'm polyamorous," and they go, "Great, we're just like each other." And then days, weeks, months later, they're like, "What the hell? We don't do anything the same. Like we just use the same label to describe something that's very different," which I think is just part of why we have to talk about this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I got very lucky with the next person I dated. I broke up that first relationship. We broke up and I meant to not date anybody seriously for a very long time. And then 2 weeks later, I went to, of all things, a Santa Con. And I met a guy and we started talking and we decided to have a date and we were in line on like everything. What we meant when we said non-monogamy, the fact that neither of us wanted to share a home with anybody, neither of us was looking to get married, neither of us wanted children. Like we were like all of the, I think we had both gotten burned. So we just hit all of the big ones like right away.
Yep. Yep.
And he was my partner for the next 7 years, the entire time I lived in Oregon. And honestly, in the end, we split because he loves living in Oregon and I want to live in New Jersey. And that just didn't feel like a thing with a future, but he's still one of my favorite people on earth. And I check in with him and we talk about our dogs and he misses my dog terribly because he was with me when we adopted him. And, it was a solid, super healthy partnership.
Yeah.
And I'm super proud of that relationship. I have a hard time referring to him as an ex because like there needs to be another term, like, I don't know, like defunct relationship. I don't know.
Well, I love that you say that because actually there's a question that comes up for me and it's actually pulling on something that somebody threw out in our community a couple of weeks ago around why, and this isn't a challenge, but why break up, right? And I think that, and I'm curious about that for you in this situation, right? It sounds like it was distance, like it was because you were moving, but maybe this is just philosophical, but I'm curious for you, the mentality of like, why break up in that situation if you don't really want to call him your ex?
So at first we weren't going to. And so then as I was moving back here, about a week and a half before I was set to move back here, my mom died. Um, I apparently in my life, I like to stack big things happening all at once.
Yeah.
So my mom passed away, and I got here, and I meant to crash in this house for like 2 months and find a place on the East Coast I wanted to live. But my stepfather married my mom when he was 24. He's never lived alone. I was moving back here to heal from a bunch of stuff. Honestly, neither of us should live alone. So we just decided to be roommates until that doesn't make sense. And so that's my life. And so the plan my partner and I originally had, where it was like we weren't going to break up and we were going to visit across the country and whatever, that kind of fell apart when I decided to kind of cocoon my life up again for a while. And we kept trying to make these plans. And my time in Oregon had been kind of traumatic for a couple of reasons. And I kept finding that I didn't want to go back there. Mm-hmm. And I also kept finding that the idea of having him here was overwhelming. And eventually I said to him, I feel like this isn't fair to anybody. Mm-hmm. And so we kind of called it, just because it felt not right to kind of, I don't know, like claim him while I wasn't wanting to put any relationship work into it.
Yeah. Or be able to, see each other.
Yeah.
Yeah. It makes total sense. I just really appreciate you talking about it, because I think this is one of those that, right, people can look at it and say, well, we're non-monogamous, so we don't ever have to end any relationship. We just shift it into something, put it on the back burner, and it just is, and we don't ever have to end anything or transition anything. And I think this is just a really beautiful look at like why, right? It's not because we didn't get along or we weren't aligned or anything negative. It's just sort of life. Life is saying, hey, right now, this isn't the best way for us to be in relationship together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I had a great setup for the whole time I was in Oregon. Weirdly, life worked out where I had all of these people I was connected to, and we were all existing kind of on the same plane of each other's lives, right? So like my partner and I had each other, and we both lived in Oregon. I lived at least an hour away from everyone, which as an anxious introvert was amazing.
Yeah.
I had another partner who lives in Nashville, and he lived with a partner. And so we would see each other like twice a year. And that is still going on. And then I had a couple like friend with benefits, like people that I would see occasionally. When life blew up a couple of years ago and mom died and I moved across the country and whatever, I broke up with the partner in Oregon, and I kind of stopped seeing all of the friend with benefits people because everything felt like too much. It felt like a lot of, this was 2021, so it was still pandemic-y. It was still, and I became really aware of, there were a couple of people in my life who were so excited for me to move back east so they could see me again. And then I got here and it was, sorry about your mom, so excited to see you. When can you come see me? And I was like, are you kidding me? You love me and you support me, but nobody's coming to where I am. Everybody's like, hey, come here because it's more important that we bone than that I support you right now. And So I have some strong feelings. Yeah. And so I cleared my slate, and my only partner has been my partner in Nashville for a couple of years now. So I keep saying I'm like theoretically non-monogamous because the door is open, but I've been kind of not dealing with most of it. Which is why I say everything's up in the air right now.
Yeah.
Totally.
But for that 7-year period in Oregon, it sounded like you kind of found a stride that worked really well for you at that time.
Oh, yeah. It was great. Yeah.
And it sounds like the conversation, I love too that the conversation you had with your partner where you both were like, we align on everything, like that it sounds like it wasn't, nobody was bullshitting, right? Like that it worked, right? And that, not to say that if it falls apart that people were being nefarious, because I think there is too, right? We go, this is what I want, and then we start down and we're like, it's not what I want. I don't know why I said I wanted this. So I know that can happen too, but it sounds like for you two, it was like you both said what you wanted and then you did it for 7 years in a pretty amazing collaborative way.
Yeah, and I think we both still want that. We just want it on polar opposite ends of the continent.
Yeah.
And I think that's really the big sticking point.
Yeah. Just like
Yeah.
logistically, realistically, it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, like we joked like it is nearly impossible to be physically further apart than we have made it and still be in the same country.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say, unless you move to Florida, but that's not really the same. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. It's a whole different country.
That's a whole different country. I'm just joking, Florida. Don't come for us. Yeah. No, I was curious too, something you said in there, John. You said kind of that I'm theoretically non-monogamous. And I'm curious, this is another one of those points that people love to debate about. Is non-monogamy sort of a thing we do, or is it an identity for us? And I'm curious, my belief is it just depends on the person. And I'm curious for you, where do you land on this one?
So for me, I've been debating this personally myself.
Excellent. Welcome to the debate.
Yes.
Yeah. Because I've been debating what life looks like for me after this. And like, I know my partner in Tennessee, I'm going to see him in 2 weeks. And we've talked about this. He's been my partner for, 9 years.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, and we've always said, this is the level at which we want to be connected. Like, we would never want to live together, or like one of my aunts was like, why don't you guys get married? And I was like, because we would kill each other. Like it's I love a show called The Good Place.
Yep.
Right?
Yes.
And in that they talk about how frozen yogurt is taking something great and making it a little terrible so you can have more of it. And I feel like that would be what we would be doing if we tried to like move in together or something. We would be ruining something just so we could have more of it. And I would rather keep us perfect and have less of us, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah. But I found myself thinking the other day, what if I met somebody that I felt like, again, we were connected on all of the levels. Now, for me, one of those levels would be, you're okay with not sharing a home with me, right? Would I then say, okay, this is the only relationship I want? I don't know. I don't think I would, because I would want to keep my partner in Nashville. So for me, it is still the identity that I cling to, but I don't know what the future holds. Every time I try to figure it out, some part of my life explodes, or someone dies of cancer or something. So yeah.
When it rains, it pours.
Yeah. Well, and you can be in that process. You don't have to know necessarily. Like, it can be an open-ended question of like, I think this is what I want. I think this is the direction I'm going. And I'm also open to that shifting and changing depending on who I meet, what connections I find, that type of thing.
I'd love to pick it to a little bit of the time that you were sort of that 7 years in Portland, and just throughout that time, what are some of the things that you learned about yourself? Because I mean, this sounds like it was kind of hot on the heels of coming out of your divorce and waking up. And I imagine that was a time of a lot of personal growth, you were learning about sex, you're learning about relationships, you're learning about yourself. And I'm curious.
Doing all the work around your books.
Yeah. What are some of the things that you came to realize about sex, intimacy, relationships for yourself throughout this time?
Oh, so that's a big one, because in retrospect, looking back, I'm realizing midway through that time, kind of my brain and everything kind of went off the rails a bit, because there are many reasons. But the beginning, when I got there, I was still trying to maintain that, like, let's date everybody and have all the sex. And I kept thinking I would get back to that like super fun dating spree that I was doing in Boston. And that never really happened. And for a while, I thought that was like some kind of failure. Like, everything should be more fun.
Okay.
And I struggled a lot in Portland because I kept saying that, like, as a sex writer and a non-monogamous person, I always felt like the biggest disappointment to people who met me, because they kept wanting everything to then be like a sex joke and like a reference to, and now like everything can be sexualized, and I have zero patience for that. I feel like for me, sex stuff is like hot sauce, right? So like when you use it right, it's great. When you want me to be impressed by how much of it you use and you throw it on everything constantly, I get bored of you very quickly and also stop ruining my eggs, right? So like that's kind of how I ended up feeling about it. I got really burnt out kind of really quickly. And I ended up getting very protective of kind of my energy and who I engaged with and who I even, that first boyfriend where it didn't work out, he wanted everyone to know I was a sex writer all the time.
Okay.
He would tell everybody. And then he would get really jealous that everybody liked that and was excited about that and thought that was cool. And so it put me in this weird position all the time.
Yeah.
And I hated that.
Yeah.
And so by the time I came out of that 6-month relationship, I got really picky about who knew what I would do. So I would start telling people, well, I'm a writer. And, you know, I do copy editing and stuff, you know, to pay the bills and stuff. But I would keep it all to myself as much as possible. And I learned that I was not comfortable with the expectations that come with having the word sex attached to your job title.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That's very valid because it's a lot.
It is a lot. Yeah.
Well, and it sounds like one of the things that I took away from what you just shared is that even with sex being a foundational part of your work, in life, it is a part of life. It's not all of life, right? Like chocolate sauce isn't your meal. It's a part of your dessert, right? It's a part, it can be a part of life, not the thing that feeds you all day, every day, at least for you, right? I'm sure there are some people who could live off of chocolate sauce, and those people are awesome too. So I think that's a really important thing, and I just can relate to so much of that. Like dreaming of a chocolate sauce life.
I was just thinking, like, well, if you lived on chocolate sauce, you might have to contend with diabetes, and that's where my brain went.
Yeah.
But your point's good.
Well, and so how did you take that learning and sort of use it to shape what you did, moving forward?
I think that is how I started doing what I referred to as like JoEllen ruins everything. I started doing all of these things where I would write about like non-sexy uses of sex stuff. So like I have posts on my site where it's like using a bullet vibe to unclog your sinuses, or like why the Liberator wedge is really great for propping yourself up when you need to sleep and you're sick, and like all the like cool unsexy uses for sex things, because it would give me a way to like stay in that community and stay, connected and still write about the like, here's cool sex resources. But also every couple of weeks I'd pop up and be like, yes, guys, I'm that dork who wants to talk to you about why you should massage your face with this vibrator. And it gave me that breather I would need to like get people to stop. Like I used to get comments on my site that would be like, but tell us in more detail how you used that dildo on your G-spot. And I'd be like, no, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
That's for you to figure out on your own G-spot.
Yeah.
I love that you were able to kind of morph your work into what worked best for you. Like that's putting almost like a comedic spin on it in a lot of ways, but also practical. And that allowed you some like to stay in that space, but also make it work in a way that worked for you.
Yeah, and it was weirdly fun, and I feel like over the last couple of years I've even disconnected from that, and that makes me kind of sad. But it was a kick to do it while I did it, and I think the world has transitioned so much more to video content, which is not a thing I was comfortable with. And my big platform back in the day was Twitter, and we know what's happened there. So. But back when you could be cool on Twitter and do all your stuff in words, man, was it fun.
Yeah. And there was something else you said a minute ago that jumped out at me, which was the idea that if you didn't go down Trampage version 2, that you were a failure, that you weren't doing it right. And I don't know if you could speak to that a little bit more, because I think that's something that I know I've experienced, and we talk to a lot of people who get, and not necessarily because it doesn't look like that, but just because it doesn't look like something. Like it has to.
The expectation.
Yeah, there's some expectation that we get in our brain about what this is supposed to be, and if we don't do it, we've failed.
So I've also, I've spent my life as a very introverted, very shy, very sensitive overthinker. So I've spent a lot of my life feeling bad about like wanting to be home and wanting to be quiet and not wanting to be out in the world doing all the things. Like me living in New York City as a 22-year-old was kind of a mess, right? Because I was just constantly convinced I was doing it wrong. And so that small period where I was like going crazy in Boston was the like one time in my life I felt like I was, living life the way television told me I would be living life.
Yep.
And so kind of going back to the world where I liked being on my couch with blankets felt like I was failing, and I was, I don't know, never going to be cool again and never going to, I don't know, live the life I was supposed to be living. And, how am I going to meet people if I never leave my home? And then I got a dog, which, just makes that worse because, I never want to leave him and all of that. And I think that's it. And there he's making noise. So let me know if that becomes a
No,
problem.
you're good.
Yeah, he heard
Very
you.
pet friendly here.
Yeah, he heard you talking about him.
But I think, like, sex notwithstanding, that becomes a thing for a lot of people, that, like, I'm not social enough, I'm not loud enough, I'm not boisterous enough. And when you add the idea that you're a, like, sex-based career person to it, it becomes so easy to think you're screwing up.
It was a lot of pressure.
Yeah. Yeah. And I had spent so much time, because I had that big depressive episode in my 20s, I'd spent so much time afraid that I was going to fall into another one. And when my dad died, I was very proud of myself because I thought I didn't fall into a depressive episode. In retrospect, we have figured out since that what I did instead was I worked really, really way too much and dated all of Boston, and that is another way depression can look. But what happened for me is in 2016, trying to write a book completely in a vacuum, which I don't recommend. Like, don't try and write a book without a publisher, without anybody, like completely on your own when you have no idea what you're doing. Just don't do it that way. It was bad for my brain. Doing that with the world being how it was in 2016, just a lot of things happened all at once. I should have moved back to New Jersey then, whatever. My brain snapped and I fell hard into a bad depressive episode that went on for the next 5 years. So that was when I stopped caring if I was failing, and I just hid in an apartment in Portland for 5 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you were going through that, but it sounds like you were also having these relationships, and you did have some connections while you were going through that.
My brother gave me a hard time once because I was like, I'm awful and I'm falling apart. And he was like, most people who say that can't get one person to date them. And at last count, you have 3 people dating you right now. And I was like, yes, I understand. But
listen to me. My life is falling apart.
Let me complain, damn it.
But that was both, I think, the beauty and the problem with all of my relationships being distanced.
Yeah.
It allowed me to compartmentalize them. So, like, I would be constantly alone in this apartment in Portland, and then I would go places and be with my partners who a lot of times didn't know what my life looked like when they weren't around. And so it was even my partner who lived in Oregon, I think a lot of times did not know how bad things were.
Yeah.
Because
it was easy to hide.
Yeah. Yeah. Until there was one day I finally called him in like 2019 and just said, it's not working anymore. Everything is too bad. And to his credit, got in his car, drove an hour, came and cleaned my apartment and made me go to sleep. And after that, like, he knew, but I think I was able to both hide it from everybody and not get any of the support I needed because everybody was so distanced.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They were there, but at an arm's length.
Yeah.
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 Well, and I think it's really fascinating from a different perspective. It sounds like you got to, like you said, I just stopped caring whether or not I was doing it right or living up to it. And it's almost like at that point when you stop caring, depression be damned, but you were able to then start doing what maybe felt a little bit better, at least in terms of connecting with other people. When it was like, I don't need to live up to the Instagram and Twitter influencer version of what my life should be. I get to just, I almost not I get to, but like I can't to do anything else but this. And it sort of breaks you free of it a little bit.
Yeah. And, I think I just kind of started falling off the grid.
Mm-hmm.
And for about a year or two in there, I tried to like keep up a facade and I tried to keep it going for my website and all that. And then it just kind of, it kept falling off. And it, like I said, around 2019 was when I started admitting it. And it was like fall of 2019. And then a couple months later, suddenly everyone was stuck at home.
Mm-hmm.
And so everyone was like, what are we going to do? We're stuck at home. And I was like, well, let me tell you.
I've been preparing this my whole
Welcome
life.
aboard. I've been here for a couple of years. Here's how we do this.
I've been preparing my whole life for this moment.
This is my time. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's ironic in some ways of like just when you started opening up to more people in your life about what was actually happening for you at home, then that like 4 to 6 months later, everything happens with the pandemic. Like, talk about timing. Oof. But also, in some ways, I'm grateful that you were able to start talking about it before that happened.
Yeah. It's very on brand for me. My mother would have joked about it that like the minute I would come out and say something like, I don't know, hey, I just broke my wrist, my brother would walk in and be like, guys, I'm in a full body cast. Like the minute I would reach out a little, something way bigger and like more pressing would happen. We don't know why. It's a pattern of horrible timing my life has. The example I always use is I started my first grown-up real-world New York theater job on September 6th, 2001.
Oh, yeah.
And it just went on like that for years and years. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Talk about timing.
Oh, yeah. I mean, my first book, Monster, The Monster Under the Bed, came out on March 27th, 2020.
I didn't realize that either.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
JoEllen, I'm a little worried about having you on the podcast now.
When my second book, In It Together, came out and I was going around doing publicity stuff for it, we would tell people these stories and then I would get to like, and my second book just came out and nothing bad happened. You're welcome. Because like nothing happened with that book and it was a huge relief for everyone.
Amazing.
Yeah.
The spell is broken.
Yeah. Also want to point out, having your first book come out in March of 2020, maybe in some ways was a blessing. People were at home and could read it.
And, the things people wanted to talk about in 2020, actually, so I had a second book in mind that was about a completely different topic, like not at all related to this. And people wanted to talk a lot about supporting loved ones with depression. In It Together, my second book, I always joke it's monster minus the sex, right? It's supporting any loved one with depression. And that book happened because when I would do the online events for Monster, people would talk and talk and talk about like, well, can I apply this to other people in my life? If my mother has depression, my cousin has depression, and I was like, ooh, I should give these people a book that doesn't have sex in the title so they can feel a little more comfortable. And that's how the second book happened. And I think it really was the influence of the pandemic and so many people struggling.
Yeah. Of all like things to go through, the timing of a book about depression
Yeah.
was in some ways very fortuitous timing because people had time to get on the virtual events to talk about it when maybe they wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah.
Well, and maybe this is a good place to sort of shift a little and talk a bit more about your two books and your work, because, people listening here might think, well, the whole website is defunct and everything is gone and you're just holed up in a bedroom. But like,
It's all still there, folks.
I was going to say, your work is still very much alive. We were just on
Yeah.
your website a few minutes ago, and it's incredible work. And I'm curious, just sort of what, for Monster Under the Bed, you've talked, obviously, probably your own real world experience in life influenced that, but what really motivated you to put the book together, and what were some of maybe your favorite things that came out of it?
So what really motivated me were actually a couple of relationships in my own life, right? Well, first it was that feeling that people had that they were experiencing these sexual side effects and they felt like doctors and stuff were telling them that they weren't happening. And I had a conversation with a doctor who told me, when I told him that I had sexual side effects, he said, I told you that they weren't likely because this book told me that they weren't likely. And he explained to me that the way information got put in the book was doctors report back what their patients report back to them. And he said, so it's great when patients like you come in and talk to me, but a lot of patients are afraid to talk about this. And I thought, okay, well, let's all talk about this because that's how we get better information. But I also got to thinking about how in my marriage, we really struggled. We couldn't talk about anything, and we definitely couldn't talk about my depression. And years later, when my ex struggled himself, he came to me and apologized about not understanding because he was going through trying antidepressants. And he said, I had no idea. I had no idea what this was like. And hearing that happen, I was like, oh, yeah, people need more information. People need something they can find out about. And then when I was dating my partner in Oregon and I started going into a depressive episode, he had no frame of reference. And we went looking for books. And there were a lot of books that were like, we found one that we liked, but we found several that were kind of like how to protect yourself from your partner and their depression so it doesn't drag you down with all its toxicness.
That'll bring you closer.
Yeah. And I was like, I get it, but also, no, that's not what we want. So I just wanted there to be something else. And I struggled a lot with whether I should be the person to write that because I'm not a doctor, I'm not a therapist, but also no one else was writing it. So here we are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And for you, and maybe just your experience of what came out of it, how did it land with people, and what did you get out of putting this work out into the world?
Oh, I struggle a lot. Again, anxious, super sensitive overthinker. So, the good feedback goes right past me, and the bad reviews I can quote verbatim.
Yep.
But
can relate to that a bit.
Yeah. But the thing that I hear about both the books, but honestly about Monster, I feel more, people feel heard and people feel like they have an in to something they didn't have any ability to understand before. And that's what I wanted for people. Like I wanted, I don't know, like any insight at all. I want to give people a flashlight, right? Like I don't have all the answers, but I can give you a little bit of something. I can give you some language to use. I can give you some way to figure something out where you had nothing before.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and it's that feeling of, at least for me, I get that, like, I'm not alone, or there's something here, because it's easy to feel like you're crazy, especially if you go talk to your doctor and you're like, this is happening, and he like flips through the book and says, well, not according to my research. It's not happening for you. And you're like, no, it fucking is. Like, this is what's going on for me. So
it's really like having to change the narrative of, no, we, like, you just said, we need to talk about these things.
Yeah.
We need to share with our peers, our friends, our families, and our clinicians and our doctors, so that people, the data shifts, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm curious, so then you already talked a little bit about the motivation for the second book, from what you got out from the talking about the first book. But how about on your end, kind of like, what have you learned from that one as well?
Okay, so the second book is interesting. So I said with the first book, don't write a book like in a vacuum, and that, and I spread that process took me 5 years, and in it together we were talking about me writing, and it kind of landed in this limbo, and I wasn't sure if I was supposed to be writing it, and then my mom passed away and I moved, and one day I was freaking out about a bunch of things, and it crossed my mind that I had never heard back from my publisher, and I fired back in the middle of this, and my boyfriend was sitting next to me, and I don't know what, collectively, I don't know why we thought this was a good idea, but I fired off this email where I was like, am I supposed to be writing a book? Because we agreed a book would be due in 9 months from now. Should I be writing a book? Yes or no? What is happening? And 2 days later, I got back a message that was like, yes, you should be writing this book. It is due in February. And I was like, oh, shit. And so they sent me a contract, and I agreed to write a book in 9 months right after my mother died. And the upshot of that is I don't remember a lot of the process of writing in it together. But I love it as a book. I'm very proud of how it turned out. Reviewers either love it or get really angry about it. And I'm basing that largely on one guy. But,
those negative,
he's so mad.
Those negative reviews really stick hard. It can be a tough one.
But it's so, I was thinking about In It Together today, and I love so much of it. I hate that I used the 5 love languages as a big cornerstone of what I was trying to explain, because I've learned so much more about that now, but it's got so much in it in terms of tools for practical use for people. And that's what I wanted to give people. I wanted to give people things they could actually use, as opposed to just ideas of what might be happening in terms of depression. I wanted things people could look at and say, oh, this is a thing I can do. And not only does In It Together have that across the book, but it's got a chapter at the end that's literally just here are texts you can send. Here are easy things you can do. Here's a chore you can do for people. It's just a list. And I love that about it. Also, I don't remember writing it. And I feel like I shouldn't publicly admit that as much as I do.
I think the honesty is refreshing. I imagine there are many of us who go home from work at the end of the day, or sometimes look back over a year and go, the hell did I do? And so to have a very impressive, tangible book that you can look at, even if you don't remember it, it exists.
Well, and also with the lens of, you just said you wrote this book in nine months just after your mom died.
And deep in the grief process.
Yeah. So that's a
Impressive.
huge factor as well. And moving across the country.
For people who need encouragement, for people who are struggling with projects, here's a quick story. I called my editor and said, this book isn't going to be ready. I don't know what to do. It's not going to be. And they said, send us what you have. Send us what you have, and we will knock it into shape. And I said, okay. And I sent them what I had, and they got back to me, and they said, JoEllen, we don't know what to tell you. This is a book. And I was like, oh, cool. Okay. Because sometimes when you're making something and you're just too close to it. Your nose is right up against it. You can't see the whole thing, and you're panicked. So sometimes you got to hand it off to someone else, even when you're terrified and you think it's terrible and you think, it's garbage. Let someone else look at it, because you're just too close to it and it seems like nonsense.
Yeah. Well, and thank you for sharing that too, because we're all often our worst critic, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You might think it's that one person who left us a shitty review, but no. 1 star is bad. I'll give myself 0 all day. So yeah. Well, I'm curious now, JoEllen. I know we started this and you said your life is just completely up in the air, and you're trying to figure out what maybe what's next, or maybe just ride the wave of not knowing. But I'm curious, sort of what do you see? I mean, are you still putting work out on your website, or are things just sort of in limbo as you figure out what's the next step?
Oh my goodness. So right now I have a Patreon where every month I put out either it's like luck of the draw. You either get a classic post that I just found on my computer because I found all of this content that I wrote and forgot about and never went on my site,
Okay.
or you get a brand new thing that one day hit me and I sat down and wrote, and I am only publishing there. So that's where my like newer life writing, whatever stuff is happening.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also just doing my like work life, which is copywriting for people. And so sometimes when you go to buy a product and there's like, check out our newest, whatever, that's me. But the weirdest and most exciting thing I'm doing right now is I wrote a television pilot.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. It's weird and it's crazy, and like most television things probably will not go anywhere, but it's a completely new genre of things for me. So I guess I'm just kind of open-minded to all kinds of writing right now. But that's what I mean when I say I have no idea what direction life is going in right now.
Amazing. Are you willing to talk a little bit about what the pilot is, or is it top secret?
So you know what's funny? I'm co-writing it with a very old dear friend, and I don't know if I'm like allowed to talk about it.
All right. Well, mystery. We'll leave it shrouded in mystery for now.
Yeah, and see what happens.
Yeah. Well, we will make sure links for your Patreon and your website and all your work are available in our show notes. And I will say, this is just my own 2 cents on business advice. If you want to ramp up your Patreon, you go into a lot of detail about ways to use that vibrator on your G-spot. People love paying for that shit online. Get yourself on OnlyFans and life is blue skies. So no. All right. Well, I'm so glad we got to talk today, JoEllen.
Thank you so much for everything that you shared. And I'm just curious, like, is there anything else you wanted to get out there?
Oh, I don't think so. I really think that is what is happening with me. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, when you're allowed to talk about the pilot and when it gets picked up, we will definitely bring you back and we'll hear an update on your story, and can't wait to talk again soon.
Yeah. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
You too. Thank you.
And we're back. A huge thank you, JoEllen, for coming on, sharing your story today, and for all of the amazing work that you put out there. A quick reminder, anyone listening, go over to our website, normalizingnonmonogamy.com, click on the podcast tab, and look at the links to all of JoEllen's work. You can also find links in your podcast player. But it is incredible. Thank you, JoEllen.
I'm going to encourage you not to just look at those links, but to click on them and then go do stuff with them.
Of course. I didn't mean just look at the link itself.
I know. All right. Well, thank you from my side as well, JoEllen, for being here and for sharing your story and for doing the amazing work that you do.
A couple of quick upcoming event reminders. We have our next virtual speedfriending event coming up on March 20th. Mark your calendars and join us then. And we have an in-person community retreat coming up April 25th to the 27th in Atlanta. More information can be found over on the community tab of our website.
And next week, we're coming back at you.
But before that,
we're coming at you on Friday. We've got an Ask Us Anything coming up this Friday. So please come check that out. I'll be here with Michelle. We'll be answering questions from the community, and we'd love to have you join us.
And then next week, we have our regular scheduled interview.
I already told him that. Don't you remember I already told him that?
This one will be with James. Come back and listen.
And we'll see you we'll see you Friday.
Yes.
Then we'll see you next week.
I think that's it.
And then we'll see you in Atlanta.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for listening.